Today, we're going to be discussing some of the key words that are often used in political discourse, not to advance discussion, but rather to shut it down. Specifically, we're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about equality and equity, and we're going to talk about discrimination. The words in and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with them, except that there is a colloquial or kind of a common understanding of some of these words, which is oftentimes inappropriate. In some cases, we're seeing words like racism be completely redefined. And that is causing huge problems with the ability of people to engage in actual productive discourse. We're going to break down these words. What are their definitions? What do they mean? All right, and how do we recognize when that word is being used either outside of its definition? When is it being used in such a way where it's carrying a moral context that doesn't exist? Or when is that word just being completely redefined in order to favor one side of a debate over the other? If words don't have some sort of objective meaning which we can all understand, well then now they're just tools of manipulation. They're not a mechanism in order to arrive at truth or reality. It's just a tool of manipulation. A lot of times in politics, it's a mechanism of political manipulation to shut people up that you don't agree with. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, and let's start with racism. It was being used as a tool to where if you didn't vote for a particular policy position, that was evidence of racism or evidence that you weren't concerned about racism. If you're someone that when you see the race of a particular person, you automatically assume things about them that would lead you to come to a conclusion that they are inferior or superior, that's an element of racism. All right, now let's look at the dictionary definition under the Oxford Dictionary. It starts out pretty similar, but then there's a change. It says racism is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group. So far, so good. But then they add this, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, that's not really that big a deal. I would suggest to you that it is. But when we start to define racism based off of a particular group and their status within society, that gives way, that lends weight to this argument that we're seeing more and more with things like critical race theory, where people are automatically put into categories as oppressed or oppressor. And a lot of people have come out and said, well, there's no such thing as reverse racism. I think that's actually true. There's just racism. At no point were we just sitting back and just listening to her reasoning. And so I said, okay, let's just stop for a second. Can you explain to me why you associate with that? Well, it turns out this woman who was older, she remembers Jim Crow. She remembers forced segregation. And it's not as if she saw every white person as being evil or mean or somehow associated with racism, but every experience of racism that she had gone through was perpetrated by a white person. Her frustration and her being able to associate with what Colin Kaepernick was doing didn't mean she was racist. All right? It just meant that she had experiences that were informing her decision and informing her perspective. When somebody has been the victim of racism and they have been repeatedly victimized by somebody that looks a certain way, it is not necessarily racist for them to be cautious or them to have their guard up when they're around people that look that way. Now, if they allow that to manifest itself into racist actions, or if they allow that to manifest themselves into saying that because a white person was racist against me, therefore all white people are racist, that's problematic. If we start redefining it based off of who has power, instead of the actual definition and the actual ideas behind racism, we create this two-tier system where now, if you are in a minority group, you're now incapable of racism. If I were to take the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and I was to put him into a foreign country for which he was a minority population, maybe even a marginalized population, would he be any less racist? No, he's still a racist. If you're a racist and you're the prime minister, or if you're a racist and you're the CEO of a huge company, then your ability to carry out racist ideas or tendencies is significantly higher, and therefore it is a significantly greater threat. Someone accuses something of being racist, ask them why it's racist. All right? If someone accuses a policy of being racist, why is it racist? The same Democrats that think it's inappropriate to require a photo ID of everyone want more gun control laws Even though gun control laws in and of themselves are not necessarily racist, but were they applied in racist ways in the Jim Crow South? Absolutely. The term equality gets spoken about a lot as if it has an inherent moral meaning. It doesn't. In order for it to have a moral meaning, it requires context. Okay, so for two things to be equal in a mathematical sense is pretty easy to understand. For people to have a good objective is equality before the law. So should society treat a doctor the same way that we treat a rapist? No. If everybody has equality before the law, but one person starts off at a competitive disadvantage and one person, starts off life born into a wealthy family, well, they may be equal before the law, but they don't have an equal chance when it comes to, seeking out opportunities. From the Race Matters Institute. And what she said was, the route to achieving equity will not be accomplished through treating everyone equally. It will be achieved by treating everyone justly according to their circumstances. Now, on face value, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with that. When you have people making different decisions for their lives, and those decisions cause different things to take place, different things to transpire, there are different consequences for your actions, whether they be good consequences or bad consequences. The moment you start to treat everybody's position in life as if it is purely a result of circumstances beyond their control, you now get into a situation where, and it's typically politicians, are the ones that are now deciding who will get what, not based off of how valuable their actions were, but simply based off of their current economic status, or the sort of things that they could have potentially been victimized before, or things that they didn't have access to. Parents reading to their children are giving their children an unfair advantage over parents that don't read to their children. Well, how exactly do you propose to adjudicate that? I am not in any way insinuating that we should not help people in need. I believe I have a moral obligation to help people in need. That is why my wife and I choose to do so. But I think not only do we achieve greater community benefits when people take it upon themselves to love and care for their neighbor without being coerced to do so. We don't just achieve more effective results, more efficient results. We also achieve more just results than we will ever get out of a system where politicians take it upon themselves to steal from one group in order to give to another group, even if their intentions are noble. There is a whole host of perverse incentives which are created through that mechanism. I'm going to judge an individual based off of their actions, off of their character. I'm not going to allow prejudice, prejudging about someone based off of other criteria. I'm going to take the time to get to know them, to observe their actions in order to make a judgment call about the sort of character that person possesses, right? That's discrimination 1A. All right, the term bigotry, the term racism comes with its own context of a moral nature, right? It is never good to behave in a racist manner. It is never good to behave in a bigoted manner, and both racism and bigotry require discrimination. It helps facilitate a very good conversation on how policy affects people within education, within the economy, within our courts, etc. Right? We want to combat bigoted forms of discrimination, but we don't want to use our language so loosely that all of a sudden we're demonizing a necessary behavior within society, the ability to determine and to judge between actions. We don't want to lump that in with bigotry and persecution and racism.